This watch, the SRPK17, actually featured on the first video on my channel. I bought it while visiting family overseas in Malaysia, and while it did appear in that video, I had only owned it for a couple of days at the time. I thought it warranted its own video, but is this a case of a holiday romance, or is this watch worthy of your time and money? Now, there are a lot of fans of the Seiko 5 range out there, so I will tread very carefully. I just wanted to start with the disclaimer that I'm only talking about this specific model and not the rest of the range in this video. I'm a huge Seiko fanboy myself, so I'll do my best not to let any of that bias creep in. This specific model is a limited edition recreation of the 1968 original Seiko 5 model, marking 55 years of the range, which is perhaps already a little cheeky given that it only came back in 2019. It's not the same, but it does put me in mind of watch brands that went bust in the quartz crisis, the name was bought out, and then the new company slaps the original founding date on the dial. When I say limited edition, I do mean that in the loosest possible sense too. 15,555 is not exactly an exclusive number. All of this is semantics though. The watch itself looks fantastic, and compared to a number of modern reincarnations is very faithful to the original. Whether you take that as a strength or weakness though is something for you to decide for yourself as you see more information about the watch during this video. Let's start with the strengths of this watch and why I bought it in the first place. Malaysia is a watch lover's paradise. I've done a lot of travelling in my life, and I've never seen anywhere with a watch shop density even close to the malls of Penang. It's almost possible to make it from one end of their largest mall to the other without ever being out of sight of the next watch shop, and I dare say my wife has never enjoyed a shopping trip less. Against the backdrop of homogeneous modern watch design, the limited edition model stood out from a mile for me. Outside of other retro-inspired models like the Timex Q, not that many modern watches are designed with the bracelet peeking out from under the case like this. I'm not a huge fan of the crown at 4 o'clock on a watch, but here it's mostly concealed and does give the SRPK17 a lot of symmetry on wrist as a result. The loom on this model is also pretty effective, but not exceptional given the higher price point over other Seiko 5 sports models. I really like the simple slimline handset. The use of colour on the red second hand offsets the blue dial printing of sports really effectively. In terms of dial printing, it's only really the change in the waterproof rating and the addition of the word automatic that has changed from the original model. Other than that, you'd be very hard pressed to tell the two watches apart. The limited edition also features the original Seiko 5 logo rather than the modern iteration. While the materials are upgraded, the design language is the same across the entirety of the rest of the watch, including the bracelet and clasp. We'll come back to that later. One thing that has changed is the caseback, which is marked with limited edition and the individual serial number of the watch. It's been a year since the watch released, but they are still available in some stores, and failing that, they sell for just over RRP on eBay, new with box and tags. The movement has also been upgraded since the original, with a 4R36 now the beating heart of the watch. It's automatic, has an anti-shock system, a 40-hour power reserve, and allows for the day-date complication to be replicated from the original. Being Seiko, it's an in-house movement that offers hacking and hand-winding. In essence, it's Seiko's in-house version of the NH36 that they sell for other brands to use. The 4R36 movement features in other day-date models like the Seiko 5 Street Fighter range and some of their Turtle models. While a solid movement, there is a premium for the limited edition Seiko 5. Those Street Fighter models can be found online for around £150 less than the RRP of the limited edition. Having said that, that is for the Blanca model, which you've got to be pretty brave to pull off wearing anywhere remotely formal. I would also add here that I've seen some sites advertising the SRPK17 for significant markups, some 2 or 3 times the recommended retail price, so if shopping online, do be wary. Clearly, the SRPK17 limited edition is a bit more refined than the Street Fighter versions and aimed at a different target audience, and so you might think it isn't that fair to compare them. But actually, those models are also limited to 9,999 pieces each, so it is a fairer comparison than it might originally seem. When I say refined, the sizing is much more palatable for me, coming in at 39.5mm compared to the 42.5mm of the Street Fighter versions. As the model doesn't have the crown guards or protruding crown of the main Seiko 5 range, it wears slimmer, and although the lugs are flared, the bracelet starts underneath, so the wearing experience feels more akin to something around 38mm despite the strong wrist presence. Now that I've waxed lyrically about why I bought this watch, let's have a look at the issues I've found with it since making that purchase. There are three main issues that I have with this model: the bracelet, the clasp and the bezel. All of these issues are caused because Seiko have stuck as close to the original model as possible, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that you're going to encounter some watch issues that don't really exist in modern watchmaking at this price point anymore. I'm just going to point out my experiences, so if you're interested in this watch, you aren't caught off guard by any of these issues. Let's start with the bezel. Now, maybe this is particular to me. I am going through the process of getting myself tested for autism and can get overly bothered by small details being off. For example, when a dive bezel isn't properly aligned, that really bugs me way more than it should. As you can see from the shots in this video, this is a constant problem with this watch. The bezel slides rather than clicks and will get moved around quite naturally by everyday wear. Now, not only does that bug me personally, but in terms of functionality, this is perhaps the least useful bezel I've ever experienced with a watch. I wouldn't trust it to time anything while I was wearing the watch and actively doing something. For the next section, I'll start by saying that I really like the look of the bracelet. It reminds me of my grandfather's Vertex watch, which expands and flexes to fit your wrist. The simple rectangular links used here are quite uncommon in modern watch design, and certainly it helps it to stand out amongst the rest of my collection. However, unlike that Vertex, this does not expand or flex. While you might view that as a positive, it isn't going to rip any of your hairs out of your arm like bracelets of old, but it is going to be quite difficult to get a snug fit with. That leads me onto the clasp, which is my final gripe. It's small and has only got 2 positions for micro adjustment. The quick release buttons are very appreciated, but the actual clasp just isn't that good. It might just be my model, but I've had this pop open a couple of times without any kind of prompting. If you look at user reviews, YouTube videos and forum discussions for this model, you will find a few people suggesting putting it onto a different strap. After nearly a year of ownership, I would concur with that statement and suggest that a black fabric NATO strap would match really well with this and counteract those 2 issues that I've had with this model. At the start of the video, I questioned whether or not this was a holiday romance for me. I have to say, I think the test of time has said that it definitely is. I've worn it away for a couple of trips, but it's never seen any kind of day-to-day wear. And while I think this watch is a real looker, and some of the problems I've had are easy fixes, there's no way of getting away from that bezel action. I've actually sold this model on now, alongside a big chunk of my collection. The process of making this video has confirmed to me that I made the right decision. The number of shots where the bezel has taken a wander really bothers me, and was ultimately the death knell for my time with the 55th anniversary limited edition. Now that does not mean to say that it's a bad watch. Far from it. The retro looks really make this stand out from the crowd, and while you can get other Seiko 5 models for less, none look like this. If you can overlook the bezel and maybe swap out the bracelet, there's a real gem here. As for me, I have the Prospex Black Series 1965 model in my collection, so really this was always up against pretty tough competition. A holiday romance for sure, but not necessarily one that I regret. As ever, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please consider leaving the video a like and subscribing if you're interested in more content like this.